Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the True Life podcast. I hope everybody's having a beautiful day. I hope the sun is shining. I hope the birds are singing. I hope the wind is at your back. And I hope that you make a decision today to tiptoe up to take a baby step to, but to move in the direction of a better version of yourself. You're good enough. You're wonderful. You're beautiful. And just if you have the courage to start chasing that thing you love, your life will get better. And I think that the world will unfold in front of you in a way that helps conspire to make your life better if you're willing to be honest and take the courage to do it. I got a great show for you today. The incredible Chris Shelton, someone with an incredible amount of lived experience. And I've always found that a person with lived experience is someone worth talking to. And so as we welcome to this episode today, Chris, a multifaceted individual whose journey spans authorship, consulting, podcasting, videography, and a unique perspective as a former cult member. As a consultant, Chris extends a helping hand to those transitioning out of coercively controlling environments, offering emotional support, evidence-based advice. Specializing in high control groups like Scientology, Chris guides individuals in acclimating to the larger world beyond their previous cult paradigm. For family and friends grappling with loved ones entangled in destructive cults, Chris provides invaluable insights on maintaining communication, understanding the situation, and in assisting in navigating the complex terrain of mind control techniques. With a wealth of experience, he aids in facilitating escapes from such environments, recognizing the nuances of each individual's circumstances. Beyond consultation, Chris is a prolific educator, sharing his knowledge through videos, podcasts, and written works on high control groups and predatory behaviors. Since departing Scientology in 2013, his platform serves as a comprehensive resource, offering a nuanced understanding of the challenges posed by cultic influence. Chris, thank you so much for being here today. I'm looking forward to our conversation. How are you?
Thank you. That has got to be the best intro I've ever had. Thank you so much. That was amazing. Because it was 100% accurate. That's exactly what I do. Thank you for that.
Yeah, I'm stoked, man. I always feel good when people do that. I want part of my method or my idea of my podcast is to show people this incredible people I'm talking to. And I think you are, man. I think that, like I said in the in the interview and prior to discussing, there's something that everybody can learn from someone else's lived experience. And you have an incredible lived experience. I was going to dish it off to you. Where's a good place to start? You want to fill in the background or wherever you want to start?
Yeah, let's go ahead and start at the beginning, I guess. Because it's easiest for people, I guess. I grew up in a cult. I was raised in Scientology, and it's a cult. It's a destructive cult. It's a group that is not good for people to be part of. It takes and takes and takes from you. And cults are when we talk about destructive cults, we're talking about groups that do very specific things to their members. And my parents had those things done to them, so they were indoctrinated and brainwashed and all of that. And it sounds all very nefarious, but it's actually pretty easy to understand if you get into the details of it. And it's not men in smoke-filled rooms, rubbing their mustaches or anything. It's a lot simpler to understand. But growing up in it, I just thought it was normal. I thought Scientology and L. Ron Hubbard and the beliefs and ideas that he, put forward in his books and his lectures, I thought that was reality. I thought that was how the world worked. And I went to public schools. I had a regular life as far as my upbringing goes. We didn't live on a commune. We weren't off in some, gated community or something where only Scientologists were. But it being a destructive cult, most of my family and friends were Scientologists. And the people that we trusted and the people that we had closest relationships with were Scientologists, were our fellow believers. That's kind of one of the things that is sort of reinforced or, encouraged in these groups, is that you cut ties with people who aren't part of what you're doing. And, you only want to associate with the good people, the right people, the true people. And that's Scientology to a T, right? Scientologists very much believe they are the center of the universe, and they are the ones who have the truth, and with a capital T, and nobody else really understands what's going on, just us. And that creates, this us versus them thing. And so I grew up thinking I was superior, I was more knowledgeable, I was more wise than other people. And I'll tell you, when you get raised with that, and then you become part of that group, which I did for 27 years after I, really started formally getting involved with it as a teenager. I spent a lot of years in Scientology. So I've been, so the short version is I've been out for 10 years. I was involved with it all the way up until I was about 42, 43 years old. And in 2013, I got away. And I've been spending the last decade recovering from the experience and educating myself and trying to educate other people about how to avoid that kind of thing, or how to get past it, or how to recover from it, or how it all works, because if you don't understand how it works, you'll never be able to take it apart and move on from it. And it will still affect you, and it will still cause you to think like a cult member, and that kind of thing. So it's been a real journey going through all of this, both in the cult and then coming out of the cult, and trying to share that knowledge with people and experience.
So obviously, you still are friends. You're still friends with everybody in the cult.
Oh yeah, obviously not. Yeah. It doesn't quite work that way,
right?
No, that's the thing about these groups is these are it's our way or the highway, right? You're either with us or you're against us. And when you have any group, I don't care what it is, I don't care if it's a sports team, I don't care if it's an acting class, if you have that kind of attitude, if it's all us and everybody else is wrong and we're the only ones who are right, you got to run, not walk away from that group. That is not a healthy place to be. And I don't care what they're talking about. I don't care if it's a group centered around chocolate chip cookies. If it's that kind of attitude, run, because it's not healthy for us. We need to be open. We need to be transparent. We need to be willing to talk and ask questions and receive answers from people and hear what they have to say that might not agree with what we have to say, and at least be willing to listen. And these groups specialize in not doing that. And Scientology is one of the worst when it comes to that. If you stray from the path like I did, and you go, hey, this isn't what I want to do, this isn't right, this is abusive, in fact, this is hurting people, and you start talking publicly about that, they shun you, they disconnect you, they disfellowship you, they kick you out. And not only are you no longer part of the group, your whole family, your friends, your business contacts, your social network, if they're still Scientologists, they cut you off. You're done. You're out of the family. You're out of the business. You lose your job. You lose everything. People have lost kids. People have lost their parents. I mean, it's tragic what happens with this. And fortunately for me, my parents actually kind of got out before I did. So thankfully, they were there to support me when I got out and came to my, sort of came to my senses. But it took a long time, and there was a lot of stuff that happened during that time period.
It's interesting being born into that. And you had mentioned, like, how would you know anything else? Like, if you're born into something, it just becomes normal, whatever the hell that means. But like, and also as a young age, it seems like that is the foundation when we begin to grow these skills of critical thinking. And so if you're not allowed to really flex those muscles of critical thinking at a younger age, how do you begin to question things at an older age? And I'm wondering, what was that like? Were there certain things that started happening where you're like, that doesn't really make sense? Did you start, what were the cracks that began to happen to allow the light to come in for you?
Well, it's a process, really. It's a long-term thing, especially when you're involved for as long as I was. There's a difference between, and we sort of classify people as first-generation members versus second-generation members. In other words, people who were converted into the group as an adult or as a young person versus someone who was raised in it, who never had any worldview outside of the, what you might call the cult paradigm, right? Or the way of thinking. And so being raised in it, it's your version of normal. It's your version that, you are raised with the idea, for example, for me, Scientology has a very specific set of beliefs. One of them, and one of the most foundational, is that you and me and everybody are spiritual entities first. And we have our own bodies, like the body you have and the body I have right now. It's just like a set of clothes we're wearing. It's a temporary thing. You go from life to life to life, and you grow a body, and you experience a lifetime, and the body dies. And then as a spirit, you're still alive. You never died. You move on and you get another body. As a baby in a hospital, you go, assume a body, and you grow it, and you have a whole life, and you think you're that body.
Yeah.
Because you're kind of conditioned as a spirit to think that way. There's a lot more to that, but
right.
in Scientology, that's kind of the version of reality, is that reality is that you're not your body. Your body has nothing to do with who you really are. And since I grew up with that idea, that brought a whole set of beliefs and conclusions and attitudes with it. For example, in Scientology, one of the attitudes towards children, often from Scientology adults, is that their children are really just adults in little bodies. And they treat them as though they are adults in little bodies. They give them responsibilities that are adult responsibilities. They will talk to them and interact with them as though they are adults with a limited language set, right? And this can become quite abusive when it comes to certain adult activities that people get up to, or adult conversations that people have that are not at all appropriate for children to hear or be involved in, because they don't have the experience or maturity for it. But Scientologists believe, well, you're an immortal spiritual being first, so that's how I'm going to treat you. And this is provide, open the door to some real child abuse in that group.
Wow.
We don't have to get into all the specifics of how right this second, but just in terms of answering your question, it's a different kind of normal, and informed by this whole different set of beliefs. And some of these beliefs might seem kind of no big deal, or it's just a religious faith, and what's the big deal? But then I point out something like this, and I go, look, if you're talking to a 10-year-old about, intense sexually explicit matters because you think they're an adult in a little body, you are not treating that 10-year-old well. You're abusing that 10-year-old. And it's not just, it doesn't just go to talking, it also goes to how they act. And that can be quite traumatizing to children. So these beliefs and these ideas can really have very negative outcomes. For me, I believed not only that I was an immortal spiritual being, but that I had a line in on the truth, and that I was better than everybody else around me. And it's an ego trip. It can instill a kind of narcissistic attitude in children. And when you grow up thinking that, and that's your version of normal, you carry that on into your adulthood, and you basically act like a jerk to everybody, right? Which is kind of how I was for a lot of years. I'll admit it. I own all of it. I did horrible things as a cult member, not criminal things. I didn't go that far off the path, but I did some really nasty stuff, and I treated people very, very badly. And I thought, because I was in this morally superior place, that it was fully rationalized and justified and acceptable behavior. So it can affect your life in very, very interesting ways, and it can be a real process to start putting holes in that story, to start figuring out, wait a minute, something's not right here. And it's usually is a progression of what we might call like moral outrages. Like somebody does something, you see something happen that you disagree with in the group. Somebody gets disconnected, somebody gets shunned, and that person's not an evil person. You've known that person for years. They're not horrible, they're not awful, they're very faithful people. But suddenly the group is turned against them. And now they can't just leave the group in peace. They must be vilified. They must be turned into a villain. They have to be a bad guy. because it can't be that somebody just decided one day to leave the group. They have to be a bad guy. And so they are declared a suppressive person. This is the label that the Scientology will give you. You're suppressive. You as a suppressive person, all you do is push people down all day. You just suppress people. You stop them from being who and what they, you know, could be or whatever. So so I saw some people get declared and I thought, that doesn't quite seem right. And I was working for the church at this point in a very, very intense, full-time, 24/7 operation, right, which is called the Sea Organization. I had steadily gotten more and more involved over the years of my experience with it. I started working for the church out of high school. And then when I was 25, I went all in to the Sea Org. It's called the Sea Org. And it's it's quite something. It's not quite like anything else, you know. It's its own thing. It's sort of like joining the military if the military was a monastery. You know, wow. It's kind of like a little bit of both. There was ranks and ratings and yes sir, no sir, how high sir, and saluting, and it was kind of paramilitary. And there were uniforms, you know, just like the Salvation Army has uniforms. Yeah. We had uniforms. And it's this whole culture of conformity and compliance and doing what L. Ron Hubbard said and not doing anything else and dedicating your life to it. And I did that for 17 years. I worked very hard. If you've ever heard about Scientology, if you've ever heard about the billion-year contract that you sign, that's the Sea Org. That's where you're committing yourself to a spiritual commitment of 1 billion years of your, you know, not only this lifetime, the next one and the next one and the next one. I'm all in. That's what the Sea Org is about. So it's pretty fanatical. And I was in a very fanatical kind of headspace about Scientology. I thought this was the only thing that was going to save the world. This was the only thing that was doing any good. If you've ever heard Tom Cruise talk about Scientology, he talks about it like this. You know, we're the only ones who can help. We're the only ones who know what we're doing. You know, he said these things on camera. So that's how I felt. And so when you're in that frame of mind, when you're that far into it, it's pretty hard to just snap out of it one day. It doesn't quite work that way. It takes a series of things to kind of break down your belief and your faith in it and your dedication. So there were a lot of things that happened that were, I was physically assaulted. I was psychologically abused. I had a lot of things happen that sort of wore at my belief. Right. But the thing that finally sort of turned the tide for me and made me wake up was when I realized, it was as an epiphany, as a oh my God kind of moment, that my day-to-day activity in Scientology was more consumed with lying to people than it was in telling them the truth. In order to get them to do Scientology or be part of Scientology or recruit them into it, I had to lie. And there were a number of lies I had to tell. And I had so conditioned myself to believe that these were okay to do and it was acceptable because the end justifies the means, right? As long as they come in, as long as they're part of Scientology, I've done a good thing, no matter how much I had to lie to them to get them to come in. And once that became clear, once I had that kind of moment of, oh my God, wait a minute. Yeah. This isn't right. I'm lying, like just straight up, you know? And I thought, okay, this is not what I got into this for. I did not join this group to run around lying to people all day. And it was also, of course, by this point, I'd also noticed how money intensive this group was. You know, for years and years, it was so obvious that it was just after people's money. And I didn't join this group to, you know, rip people off or cause them to go bankrupt. That wasn't part of the picture. I was there to help people. And so watching people go bankrupt, watching them cash out their kids' college funds or trust funds, or take out 4 or 5 mortgages on their house and max out all their cards to pay for more and more and more Scientology, and then see that their life wasn't getting any better as a result of that. It was getting worse. Well, that's the exact opposite of what I thought Scientology was supposed to be doing for people. I thought it was supposed to be helping them and making their life better. So that disparity, seeing that and it becoming more and more obvious to me over time, finally made me wake up in 2012. And I was like, I gotta step away, and I gotta stop working for the church. And I still believed in the faith of it. I still believed in the tenets and the practices of it. I just thought the organization was a bit off the rails. As an organized religion, something's wrong here. But after I got out, I learned a lot more. And within a few months of leaving, I learned everything. And I was like, okay, I got it. I'm never doing this. This is crazy. And I learned it was all based on lies and deception and fraud. And it was actually hurting people. And I didn't want to have anything to do with that. So that's what finally got me out. And that was in 2013. That's
wow.
Kind of the story. Yeah.
Wow.
Well, answer to a short question. So
yeah. Well, thanks for sharing it. It must be difficult. I've seen abusive relationships, and I can only imagine the magnification of an individual being in an abusive relationship versus that relationship with an individual being with a group. Like, it's bad enough when you're with one person that does mean things to you or manipulates you or says things. But what happens when it's a family? What happens when it's a community? What happens when it's an organization? How hard is it? It must be incredibly difficult. And this is probably why you're so good at helping people, is like, how do you get to the point where you go, okay, this is wrong, and this means everything I've thought of for the last 40 years is wrong? Like, that's a big step, man.
Yeah. Well, it is a big step, and it's not one that most people take right away. Right. It's not a light switch. Our beliefs don't work that way. Our brain doesn't work that way. You can look at neuroscience, you can look at psychology, you can look at how this stuff works, and you come to realize it is a process, like I mentioned before, right? It's a series of steps, getting yourself out of that headspace.
Yeah.
It took years to get you into it. Yep. It's going to take years to get you out of it. I mean, that's kind of how it works.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like moving. A way I could describe cult recovery, not totally accurate, but close, is it's kind of like when you move to another country. Like, if you imagine if you're, American and you move to China, I mean, a place where you have no real connection with what's going on. The culture is wildly different. The language is based on a whole different set of foundation, as far as how it's put together. You've got so much to learn and acclimate to, right? To relearn how to live your life in this new normal. Well, that's kind of what it's like coming out of a cult, is you're so in to a set of beliefs and ideas and actions, rituals or mantras or chanting or auditing or whatever it is that the cult does, that you got to relearn everything. And a lot of people don't necessarily see that right away. They want to just forget it. They want to leave it behind. They don't want to think about it anymore. And that's is understandable, because the reason why my analogy kind of breaks down is because it's not just moving to another country, because you have all this trauma that you're carrying around with you. You've been traumatized. Part of the structure or the experience of being in a destructive cult is psychological, physical, sexual, and financial torment and trauma. Mostly all of, some or all of the above. And some of it can be really bad. Some of it goes back to people's childhoods where they're sexually abused or, psychologically abused, where their control that is put on them and their life is so intense that when it's removed, they don't know how to get along in the world. They don't know how to control themselves because they were never asked to. You know, they don't know how their brains work. They don't know how their emotional life is supposed to look in a healthy way because it's been so unhealthy for so long. They're constantly yelled and screamed at. They're punished. They're put in a corner. They're thrown in the basement. They are put through rehabilitation work or hard physical labor on a routine basis. And they're stripped of their human rights. That's what you lose when you're part of one of these groups. And so coming out of it, it's not just oh, well, now I know everything I didn't know before, and now I can, and now my life will be perfect. You gotta, there's a lot to catch up on and learn, and even cultural references. I came out of Scientology. I never saw South Park. I never watched Friends. I never saw so many trends and social cultural events meant nothing to me because I was in this isolated world. And so when you come out, it's not like somebody just hands it to you all on a silver platter and says, well, here you go. Here's all the blanks you have to fill in now. You got to figure it out for yourself, And it's not easy. It's not easy for any of us who come out of cults to experience that. And I'm really glad that you mentioned domestic violence because it's exactly analogous to that. It's the same thing. It's the codependency and the abusive environment and the controls. Everything I just said totally fits for that situation too. Even getting thrown in the basement, right? Even being denied cultural references, even being let out of the house or having control over your own finances, right? There are husbands and wives who control their spouses to such a degree that their spouse doesn't even have control or access to their money. And this we call coercive control. And this is sort of the thing that cults do and domestic abusers do and gangs and trafficking and sex trafficking and all that. That's coercive control. It all fits under this model of behavior, which is coercive control. And that's what you really need to learn about after you come out of a cult and learn how it happened to you and why it happened to you so that you proof yourself up to not let it happen to you again. And if you don't learn and you don't grow after you come out of the cult, you're probably going to cult hop. A lot of people do. A lot of people do. Right. And I have my own explanations as to why people do that. But it really has everything to do with that recovery process and realizing, like a recovering alcoholic or like a recovering drug addict, you have things you need to do. And if you don't, you're going to keep yourself susceptible to falling back into that problem. It's like that. And that's why I'm such a strong advocate for post-cult education and recovery and therapy and doing the work, because I think that there is work to do.
Yeah, there's a really great book called Metaphors in the Mind. And in that they talk about symbolism and in this particular paragraph in this particular book, they were talking about patterns. And the author says that people don't go to a therapist because they have a psychological problem. On some level, they know that if they don't seek out answers to another person, that they'll continue creating this destructive pattern in their life. So they're seeking validation in this other pattern. And, when I think about cults or when I think about coercive control, it's this weird, twisted logic of like, if I don't let them leave, they'll find a way to love me. It's just so freaking weird to think and even though I say it's weird, I allow myself to be in that position for a minute. I could see how someone would do that. Someone who has been twisted their whole life or wants to be loved or doesn't have the necessary tools in order or doesn't think they have the necessary tools. Of course, they're going to find twisted logic to keep people in their power. Maybe we could talk a little more about these patterns and cult hopping.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. No, this is good stuff. Because I talk about schemas, right, in the brain, right? This is a psychological principle. It's not what you're thinking, it's how you're thinking.
I like
it's
that.
the pattern of your thinking.
Right.
right? And for example, right, some people lean more authoritarian than other people who may be leaning more free will and progressive, and let's be, you know, very loose about the rules that we're going to live under. And there's some people who really want structure and they want things to be patterned very specific ways, right? And so we can call these two things different ways of thinking. It doesn't matter what belief you put on top of those.
Right.
The way you think about it is kind of structurally different. And these we might refer to as schemas or, you know, metaphors or whatever in terms of how we think about how our brain is putting this stuff together. It doesn't really matter what word you use. It's just patterns.
Right.
And cults, here's the thing about cults, is a destructive cult leader has created a pattern for you. And the whole method of getting into a cult is becoming indoctrinated and learning and accepting this new pattern. This is how you have to think. Not only am I going to tell you what to think, I'm going to teach you how to think. And for example, one of the ways that they teach this in Scientology, and this might sound very innocuous, but I'm telling you, this is powerful stuff. You are told constantly in Scientology, what would Ron do? L. Ron Hubbard, the founder of Scientology. If you're faced with a dilemma or a problem in your life, you are not asked to figure out how you would solve it or what you should do. You're asked, well, what would Ron do? And you start patterning your behavior off what you think this guy would do. And that might not sound like a big deal, but you do that over and over and over and over again. You're giving over your free will and your independent thinking or your critical thinking to this other person. And you have to pattern your life around how they act. That, in fact, is one of the main goals of a cult leader, is to create a bunch of mini-me's, a bunch of people who act just like the cult leader does. And believe and follow the cult leader's teachings. And it doesn't have to be religious either. I mean, Keith Raniere, NXIVM, that wasn't religious. That had nothing to do with religion, but it was sure a cult. And he was sure telling people how to think and how to act. And everybody emulated Keith. Keith is the man. Keith is the wise guy. Keith is the one who's succeeding in life. So I need to act like him. In Scientology, you will get you'll get L. Ron Hubbard as the model, but you'll also get the living model of David Miscavige and Tom Cruise. And they are the living embodiment of Scientology. So I need to live like they do, right? They become kind of cult leader-like in their own way. And David Miscavige is the head of Scientology. He's absolutely a cult leader. So this kind of modeling of our behavior, there's nothing wrong with having role models, but the thing about cults is they take normal, regular human behavior and they dial it up to 11, right? And so, you know, where you might look to a role model or look to an inspirational speaker or look to a motivational speaker and go, yeah, that guy's making some good points, or that woman has some good things to say. I'll accept that. In the cult, they're beating you over the head with it, you know, and it's not your choice. It's you have to do this. Otherwise, you can't be part of our special secret little group, right? And that's how they indoctrinate you. That's how they get you thinking how they want you to think. And once you're thinking the way they want you to think, and you're interpreting reality, what you see and sense and feel and experience in your life, once you're interpreting all of that through the lens of the cult, well, then they own you. They control you. That's how they get it. That's how they get you, right? I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
When I was in Scientology, I never, ever wanted to go look on the internet because they teach you very, very carefully in Scientology, and other cults do this too, that if you go looking at negative criticism of our group, it will harm your spiritual progress. It will actually interfere with your ability to do Scientology, to experience the wins and the gains and the changes that Scientology is going to bring you with you in your path of spiritual growth. Well, if you go look at all that negative criticism, you're stopping yourself from doing that, because you're going to get upset and you're going to believe lies, and you're going to hear a bunch of people with axes to grind who are going to tell you all the nasty, horrible stuff that none of it's true. They're just making it all up because they hate the fact that we're succeeding and they're failing. They're failures. They couldn't make it. And so they're trying to drag you down into the mud with them. And if you believe that, if you come to believe that, and it wasn't hard to believe, when you're in a group where you think everybody's, saving the world, then you stop yourself from going and looking at that criticism. You don't need somebody standing over your shoulder telling you can't look at that, because you think you take it on yourself. You police your own behavior. And there is nobody who's going to be a better policeman to you than you. So that's how I did not look at the internet for so many years, or watch South Park, or read any of the criticism, because I thought it was going to impede my spiritual progress. And that was a lesson that Scientology taught me. It's not true. There's nothing true about that at all, but I believed it. And that's one of the things that kept me in for so many years, is I was never exposed to the other side of the picture.
Wow. It's, with every lie, there's always some truth intertwined in there. And you can see the way that skilled propagandists can twist words, but more than that, can twist the meaning of it, to say that if you look at this, it's going to interfere with your spiritual journey. And it's true. And once you start believing that, you're probably not going to believe in that anymore, but just a different way of saying it. And then it ties into the repetitive nature of who we are and our identity. And it's so amazing to me to see the way in which the word cult is part of the word culture.
That's right. That's right.
It's amazing. And it's more than Scientology. It's the community you live in. It's the country you live in. It's UPS, it's Goldman Sachs, it's all of them. They're all cultic in nature. And if you don't, anybody that's balls deep in that stuff, you can see it. And it's, what I really love, Chris, is that once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Exactly.
That's something really beautiful about that, right?
That's right.
Maybe you could speak about culture and cult like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. No, you're hitting on a very important point. It's a nuanced point, though, and it's one that's often that I find is challenging for some people to get their wits around. So I've tried to explain this in different ways. Groups are necessary, right, in order for us to survive. I mean, when you come down to the brass tacks of our existence, the real honest bottom line of how human beings get along in the world, we're born into a group called a family.
Yep.
We are then thrust out into the world pretty young, into school and kindergarten and social groups and play dates and getting along with other people who we don't know and have to learn. And we have to learn all those social skills and go through all those phases of development in our life through childhood, where we learn how to get along in groups and stuff like that. And some people are good at it and some people suck at it. And it's difficult for some people and it's harder and easier for, others. But there's no getting away from it. Not one single human being lives on an island, never, ever having any relationship with anybody else ever. That would be castaway material. That's crazy. That's way outlier kind of material. Most human beings, we're in groups. And when we're in groups, we organize in particular ways, right? This is what sociology is all about. We have leaders, we have followers. We have codependency develop as a result of that. We have lots of things called group dynamics that how groups act. And we have to organize this way because everybody can't be in charge. That would be anarchy, right? And we wouldn't have groups. And So you have to have a certain structure, and you have to have like a hierarchy. And this is just how we organize. And so some people will have a really bad experience in a group and then come away not thinking that group is bad. They'll think all groups are bad. Or any structure is bad, or any, society is bad. And we used to see this with the old frontier mentality, of well, we're out here on the frontier and we're living large, and we're independent thinkers, and we're independent people, right? And we have this independent existence. And fair enough, and that's great until you need a post office, or until you need a fire department, right? Because your house is on fire, or there's a lot of good reasons for us to organize into groups and not be siloed off into, hyper individualism.
Yeah.
So that all being said, there is a kind of personality that lives among us. And it's not a different kind of human being. It's just a different kind of personality, which is predatory. It's not a social personality. It's kind of an antisocial personality. It's the kind of person who will knowingly, premeditatively take advantage of other people, gain resources, gain influence, gain power at the expense of other people. Now, thankfully, most of us aren't like that, but some of us are. And when those people learn the different ways of controlling other people, because there's only so many ways to do it,
right?
Really comes down to about 10 different things, they'll take advantage of people. And when they're really good at it, they'll take advantage of people without those people knowing that's what's happening. Yep. They trick them. They lie to them. They deceive them. This we call fraud or deception, or, over if there's a repeating pattern of this, it moves over into this area called coercive control. Because coercive control is not just a one-off. You don't coercively control somebody once. It's a repeating pattern of behavior, right? Like we see with domestic abusers or with cult leaders.
Yeah.
So we have to have culture. This is what I've been taught. This is what I've been describing this whole time, is culture. That's what this is.
Right. And
within cultures, you can get these mini cultures, these little cultures. This one guy or this one woman or this one group of people is dictating to a whole bunch of people under them how to behave, how to think, how to talk, how to act, what to believe, how to believe. And when that person has that level of control over people, and they're doing it in a disadvantage, to take advantage of them and to abuse them and to hurt them, so that that person at the top can get all the power and hold all the influence and holds all the cards, that's what we call a destructive cult. And that's kind of how I relate those things, if that all makes sense.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And throughout literature and history, like you hear echoes of, Stoic philosophers or people in biographies say things that people who seek power should be the people with whom power is never given.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like there's signs of it. Like
that's right.
And in some weird way, like I can totally understand the intoxication of getting a group of people to do things and them not even knowing that you're the one that put the idea in their head. Like there's something amazing about that.
Yeah.
But it's it speaks to the other ideas we hear of, that absolute power corrupts absolutely. How close can you be to that flame before you get burned? Even if people that have good intentions, that have that I hesitate to call it a gift, but have learned that particular dark art or have that instinct or that insight, like even those people with a heart of good intentions end up being corrupted by it. I mean, you could argue that that's what Frodo and the whole idea of the Ring of Power is talking about, right?
That's right. I mean, that's kind of what Tolkien said.
That's it, man.
That's right.
That's it.
I mean,
Yeah.
he kind of said, this is what these stories are about, and
Yeah.
that's exactly right. It's a tricky thing because, we value things, we judge things, we rate the goodness or badness of a thing based on the context in which we're looking at it. It's always context specific.
Yeah.
Always. There's no such thing as absolute good or absolute bad, or
Right.
always good and always bad. There just isn't. And so even death, right? Even killing somebody has justified reasons for doing it and insane reasons for doing it. And context is everything. And context can change over time also, as we are so well aware of in this hyper cancel culture world that we live in now, right?
Yeah.
Context changes. 20 years ago, it wasn't a bad thing to tell that joke. Now it is, and you're getting burned for it, right? But 20 years ago, nobody cared. No one cared. And so to make it out that it's a big crime from 20 years ago to tell a joke, you're kind of like, wait a minute, right? How this changing context, like we got to think about this a little bit, because we judge people fairly harshly sometimes when we shouldn't. Now, that all being said, and I hope the audience's heads aren't exploding right now, because I'm saying context always matters, right? I'm not saying you're wrong for judging somebody, but let's figure out why and what, for what reason. When it comes to leaders, there are certain leaders who have their followers' best. Well, see, it's not about intent. That can be a tricky place to go.
Yeah.
Marshall Applewhite, the guy who headed up Heaven's Gate, which ended in mass suicide, truly appeared for many, many years to have a sincere belief in absolute insanity. He was completely off any touch with reality, believing that that aliens were coming to, that they were going to transcend into this alien life form and move on and shed this mortal coil and go on to a higher plane of existence. And this resulted in a lot of people offing themselves, and it was an incredible tragedy. Same with different circumstances though might be Jim Jones.
Right.
He became just straight up murderous and psychotic.
Yeah.
And he didn't start out that way, but he became that way through drugs and too much power and too many drugs. And he lost the damn plot, right? And he ended up killing, over 1,000 people down in Guyana, which was basically the cult 9/11. That was basically the wake-up call for the world that cults are real and that they're dangerous.
Right.
That was when it started. So intent is a tricky thing, right? You can't really judge a leader by intent. You have to judge by what they do. It's like a cult. You can't judge Scientologists by the whole Xenu story, because that's ridiculous. But is it any more ridiculous than the flood story or the resurrection story or, the Muhammad story or the Buddha story? I sat under a tree until I got, spiritual enlightenment. What are you talking about? Like, these are interesting stories, but they're not in and of themselves destructive beliefs.
Right.
It's what you do with them that matters. And when you are breaking down in a modern context, when you have a group that is breaking down and violating people's human rights, literally as laid out in a document called the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I mean, you can go look at this. This is not, some mythical sort of airy-fairy concept. This has been written down. People have a right to movement, to belief, to speak their mind, to ask questions when they have them, and to be not interfered with physically. These are rights that we recognize that all human beings have. And a destructive cult is a group that is dedicated to breaking these things down in its members. And in doing so, taking advantage of them and abusing them. all for the aggrandizement of a small number of people, often just one person, the cult leader. And so, so it's really not that hard to see, you know.
Yeah.
But context is crucial to this, because people can get so wrapped up in the context of only seeing things through the lens of the cult that they become blind to what's happening to them. I sure as hell did. You know, for decades, I thought upside down. I thought good was bad. I thought freedom was slavery. I thought, I was part of something amazing, and I was dead wrong. And I was being abused the entire time. I was just looking at it through a different lens, you know? And it can be tricky. It can be real tricky when it comes to nuances like that, of trying to figure this stuff out in a way that you can talk about it broadly. It's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard to do, you know?
It is hard to do. I can't help but notice the incredible symbolism on your shirt with John Lennon saying that organized religion is the opiate for the masses. And then you have Pac-Man, which is also like an incredible cult classic. And
right,
like I just screaming
it. Absolutely, right. And that, and in a way, I can speak to the fact that, you know, it's not just, you see, we like to point and look at the cult leaders as the whole villain in the piece, but the fact of the matter is, we are codependent.
Everyone. Yeah.
We all do it.
Yep.
Right. We have a tendency to form up in groups. Again, this is just built into us. It's not like you can talk yourself out of this.
Right.
So we want leaders. We want people to tell us what to do. We want people to give us some guidance and direction. And sometimes we can let ourselves get so carried away with that, or get so into that belief that this guy, this woman is so wise, is so full of, you know, goodness and wonderfulness, that I must give over my entire identity to this person. That's another way of describing what a cult is. It's where you lose your identity. You have, your identity is completely wrapped up in the cult identity. I'm a Scientologist first, before anything else. Before I'm a mother, before I'm a father, before I'm a parent, before I'm a child, before I'm a worker, before I'm a friend, I'm a Scientologist. And that's where I believe you get into an unhealthy level of commitment to a thing. No human being anywhere in the world should ever be that committed to anything. Because because that's on us. We do that. The cult leader is only giving us good reasons to do that, but we're the ones who have to actually do it. And when we do, we lose ourselves. And it's really hard to get back from that and find and get back to, you know, being you again. And that's what recovery is all about.
Man, there's so much in there. Like,
no, right?
Wow.
Yeah. It gets pretty heady.
I love it. Like I love behavior, and you know, I think Chris Ryan wrote a book. Forgive me for not knowing the title of it, but he speaks about this potential when grasshoppers begin to swarm, they become locusts, and there's like a physical change that happens in them. You know, and if we look at nature, if we look at ourselves as nature, then we can see the way in which nature moves and understand our identity and our actions. Grasshoppers is another way to do it.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. I might use that in the future.
Yeah, please, man.
Yeah.
Like, look at a mob. You know, we have word for it, mob mentality.
Yes, that's right.
Culture.
That's right.
You know, it's getting away. It's a way for all of us. It's a way for an individual to experience a situation through the eyes of everyone.
Yeah.
And we are that same force is what people want to harness to create change. In some ways, like if we just take out the negative connotation of cult and culture, like you said, it depends on intention. It depends on this. This is how movements get started. This is how the United States may have got started. This is how countries get started. This is how Apple gets started. This is how new ideas form. It just so happens that sometimes those ideas turn out to be horrible disasters. But without it, without the charismatic leader, without the strong man, without this potential reservoir of energy that guides people in a group, we're stuck. you know, and like there's a
Sure.
lot there, but what do you think of, like, why do we take out David Koresh but not David Miscavige? Is it because they've gotten too big and too accepted? Like, you know, is the success of Scientology, has that made sure that no other cults can survive? Was the government like, okay, that's enough. This is it. No more. We've had these guys go. We can't let this keep happening, you know? Or what do you think?
Well, it's hard to nail down exactly an answer to the question, why do we take out David Koresh and not David Miscavige? The guns had something to do with it in terms of Koresh.
Okay.
I mean, the fact that there were, not just rumors of, but actual knowledge of high-powered weaponry. And the other thing that attracted attention to Koresh was the child abuse and the sort of ritualistic child abuse that they were engaged in. But finally, law enforcement took that kind of seriously, but they didn't really understand what they were dealing with, and it was such a bloody disaster because they went in so stupidly. They just, the entire operation was just a bit of a clusterfuck, if you will, from beginning to end, because they didn't really understand the nature of what they were dealing with. Right? They didn't understand that Koresh was actually okay with dying for his cause. They didn't get that, right? And when you go into a hostage negotiation or you go into those kind of situations back then, the common wisdom was, well, the guy wants to live. No, not always true, and not so with him. So you're dealing with a different level of commitment, you could say, or dedication to a cause or to a belief than law enforcement's usually used to dealing with. And they had no real prep for that. But the pressure that came on them to do something about it came from the guns and the children. It just so happened with NXIVM that it coincided with Me Too. And it had that not happened, we would not know who Keith Raniere is right now. Because it just so happened that chance and circumstance created the situation necessary for the federal government to finally act. They had known about Keith Raniere's crimes for like a decade before, but nobody did anything about it until New York Times finally published a piece, and it just so happened to coincide with a cultural moment. And then, let's get this guy. That has not yet happened for Scientology, and it may or may not happen.
Right.
And the fact of the matter is that Scientology is one, and a very tiny one, if I may say, of thousands of cults, destructive cults out there. I mean, let's talk about the Moonies, the Unification Church. That's a gun cult. They get money from every time you buy sushi, you're giving money to a cult. I don't know that people realize that, right?
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, no, that's a true statement. Or you have, I mean, a lot of people feel a little contentious about this one, but it happens to be true that the Mormon Church, the Latter-day Saints, they got some culty stuff going on in that group. With their kids, the way they deal with their children is a little iffy in some areas. I'm not talking about straight up, ritualized sexual abuse. That's more where you get into the FLDS, the fundamental LDS polygamy cult. That's where things really take a turn steeply, steep dive very quickly when it comes to human rights. But the Mormons, for example, not to be all mysterious about this, but they have their children are subject to very, very detailed interrogations about their sexual activities as young as 10 years old from strangers, unlicensed, unregulated strangers, adults, people who are chosen to be local parish pastors or whatever the terminology is in that group. And I don't think that's appropriate behavior for a 10-year-old, for some grown adult to be not only quizzing them, but then judging them and dictating to them how they should be behaving sexually at that age is just grossly inappropriate. But the Mormons do it as a ritualized practice, and they all do it all throughout Utah all the time, right? And this is just one of many things that Mormons are sort of subjected to that's kind of culty. Not quite as bad as what Scientology does to kids, but it's kind of up there, you know. So there's a spectrum of destructive activity, you could say. Some is more destructive than others, and it's I can't remember exactly how we got onto this, but I will say that given the propensity of people to fall for nonsense, pseudoscientific nonsense, religious nonsense, political nonsense, you know, ideological nonsense, we're surrounded by nonsense, right? Scientists, you know, the whole vaccine thing, the climate change thing, right? I mean, you know, you can just go round and round and round all day on this, and people will, and regardless of where you stand on any of these issues, I think we can all agree that, you know, when you go into the QAnon conspiracy world, you know, people will adopt some really, really nuts ideas that have no basis in reality whatsoever, but they absolutely 100% believe it. Must be true. And so people kind of have a propensity to do this, which is why cults are always going to be around. You're never going to get rid of them. You know, and so all we can really try to do over time is educate people in the methods and means by which cults take advantage of you, so that if those red flags start appearing in your own personal life, you can go, wait a minute, this sounds a little familiar. Hang on. Didn't somebody say something about this one time? And maybe you can stop it before it gets too far, before the Scientology recruiter convinces you to give them, you know, your $100. You go, wait a minute, I think I heard something about this. I need to go check this out, right?
Yeah.
Like, if we can just do that much for people, that would be a lot. That would be a lot. Because right now, too many people unquestioningly accept information from sources that they just should not be accepting it from. And Scientology would be, for example, one of those sources, right? L. Ron Hubbard had absolutely no idea what he was talking about when it comes to science. He's not degreed. Didn't have an academic bone in his body. He wouldn't understand the concept of peer review or evidence or how to do a real study. I mean, none of that applies to Scientology. And yet here's this guy talking, blustering on for thousands of lectures and thousands of pages of writings about what a genius he is and how everything he says is glittering gold, right? And you just go, okay, you know, people buy it. You know, what are you going to do?
Yeah. Hopefully you don't buy it. Like,
well, that's right. That's right. You encourage people.
It's hard though.
Right? Well, it is hard. And the reason why is, and the thing I try to get across to people in terms of, you know, some ideas or tools you can use to arm yourself against this kind of thing is, one, don't be afraid to say, I don't know.
Yep.
Just don't be afraid to say that. These are the three hardest words for people to say. They just can't have it, you know. Oh no, I must know. You know, it's like, no, it's okay to not know. Because that's what opens the door to learning and growing and expanding your views and getting new perspectives. And even if you're you know, I don't want to use extreme examples to make my point, but it's just, you know, engaging with people you don't agree with can be a really interesting thing to do. And it can really grow your perspectives. And you really learn things about the other side that you didn't see before, you know, you didn't know before. I am pretty progressive. I'm a pretty left-wing kind of guy, but I engage with people on the right all the time. And I don't have a problem doing it because I get where they're coming from and I can agree with lots of things that they have to say because I agree with where they're coming from. And I'm not making them out to be some villainous, dressed in black, satanic person, you know, and that's what and we go there so quickly these days. So giving ourselves a little latitude of thinking and perspective shifting is an incredibly healthy thing to do for ourselves. And it starts with the phrase, I don't know. You know, it's instead of thinking or assuming you know things, right? That's how you run into so many problems. Another really simple principle is waiting. Just wait. If you got some important decision, if you got some important thing that's facing you that you got to deal with, and somebody's like, now, you have to decide now, you got to buy it now. Don't walk out of here. If you walk out of here, this sale is going to go away, or, all the tricks they use, right? Give yourself some time. If it's that big of a deal, it'll still be that big of a deal tomorrow.
Yep.
But your emotional state will change. And that lets your rational mind kind of kick in a little harder, right? Because when we make emotion-based decisions, they're so often so wrong and we regret them later. Because we don't give ourselves the time to actually think about what we're doing. And this is encouraged. You only live once. YOLO, go, 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 right? That whole thing, right?
Yeah.
We have a society that is built around the idea of go, go, go. And it really should be, maybe hang on a second, So there is a little bit of that. And the other thing is understanding that you have emotions.
Yeah.
And that emotions, the biggest thing, the number one biggest thing in the last 10 years that has meant more to me in my own personal recovery and in helping other people with theirs is really breaking down for people that their emotional life is a very real thing, and that their emotional needs and that their emotional reactions are the thing that drive their decision making. It's not their rationality and their logic and their reason that is behind them most of their decision making, right? We're driven by our emotions. And if you can understand that, that's a very powerful step in getting some control over it, because our emotions are built to literally control us. That's what they are. I mean, they're responses and reactions to things in the world. And we get mad, we get sad, we get upset, right? We become bored with things sometimes. Like, there's lots of different emotional reactions, but those emotions are there for a reason. And if we can learn to listen to them and understand them and what they're trying to tell us or do for us, then we have what's called emotional intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have some emotional intelligence, you are more armed in this world than almost any number of lessons in critical thinking. They go hand in hand, believe me. They're both necessary. But emotions is really where it's at, because that's when cult leaders get you, when domestic violence, abusive personalities, when predators prey on you, they do it through your emotions. They don't reason you into stuff. They feel you into stuff. And that's a really important principle to understand to get along in this world.
Yeah, it's plugging into it's circumventing the rational mind.
Mm-hmm.
And, when you think, what an interesting emotion is guilt. A lot of people feel guilty about something. And so then that causes them to do other things or to act in this other way. But, the purpose of guilt is not to stay in guilt. The purpose of guilt is to realize you've made a mistake and not to make it anymore. But we don't teach emotional intelligence. Like, imagine what the world may look like if in grade school, children were taught that their emotions are action signals. Hey, this is an action signal. This means this.
That's right.
You could alleviate a lot of interesting things, right?
Oh, absolutely, you could. It would be tremendously important to do that. And I want that. When I first got out of Scientology, I ran across the works of Carl Sagan, James Randi, skeptic.com, right? Michael Shermer, Penn and Teller, like professional skeptics, right?
Right.
And a lot of them tend to come out of the field of magic, which is really hilarious to me. Nowadays, you have Darren Brown, who does amazing work breaking down so many psychological principles of influence and control through a bunch of documentaries and work that he does. And that's where you can learn sort of, there are people who frame it in different and interesting ways. Joe Rogan had Darren Brown on his show a few years ago, and Brown was explaining hypnotism and the nuances and layers of hypnotism and how it really works, because it's not, dangle a watch in front of people and
Right.
all this other crap that you see, right? There's so much to it. And he was talking honestly about it. And Rogan was kind of like, so you're kind of meaning like you can, like, it's really interesting that you can kind of hack somebody's mind, you can get admin control of their mind. And no, that's not what this is. It's not like that. It's that there are things that will influence people. And there are only so many things that will do it.
Right.
And emotion is the easiest way to do it, because we're so conditioned to it, and because we're going to have emotional responses whether we want to or not. We don't control them. We have them. And once you have them, that's when you can start putting some control in. You can't necessarily control if you're going to feel anger or not. It's what you do with that anger that matters, not whether you're feeling it. Same with grief, shame, blame, guilt. Guilt is a very powerful motivator. Incredibly powerful, because it relies on the threat of loss of your social network. Right? If you feel shame, you feel guilt because you've done something that other people are now going to judge you for and look down on you for and think badly about you for, and you're going to lose valuable connections and valuable resources and valuable relationships. And that's where that blame and guilt stuff really sits for us, and it's incredibly powerful because of all the social conditioning and social necessities that we have. Community, the sense of community and having a community and having social relationships is classified within us as an emotional need. It's not an emotional desire. It's not a want. It's not an option. You have to have it. And if you don't have it, you're not happy. And you'll never be happy until you fill that void somehow. That's what an emotional need is. And that's why these emotions can be so powerful for us in motivating us or influencing us to behave the way we do. And the predators in the world, and I call them that because I don't want to talk about narcissism and personality disorders and all this other stuff. I'm not a psychiatrist, right? And personality disorders are a thing, but they're not the only reason people act predatory.
Right.
Predators are predators.
Yep.
And when somebody's preying on people, they're often using emotional buttons and triggers to get people to act the way they want them to, and that's that. So there's no other way around it except to understand your own emotional life.
It's fascinating to think about.
Yeah.
It seems to me another powerful emotion is fear. And if you look at the way it's wielded through television or propaganda or sales or shared sacrifice or shared goals, it's weird how maybe you could speak to the idea of how we use emotions coupled with language is like a 2-punch combo to lead people down the primrose path.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, yeah. Oh, sure. I mean, this is all based on, we go back to Lifton here. There's a guy named Robert J. Lifton who did a whole research study, wrote a whole book on the psychology of authoritarianism and totalism and thought reform, right? Which is another term for brainwashing.
Thought reform.
Yeah, thought reform. That's the more scientific term for it, right? Because brainwashing is so colloquial and silly as a term, right?
Right.
But the root of brainwashing, the concept there is purity of thought or purity of thinking. You're washing, you're making it pure. And it's not cleaning it out and making a blank slate. It's a purity thing. And this comes out of Maoist reconditioning camps back when the Chinese Revolution happened, and they needed to re-educate people. And Lifton studied this in detail, and he came up with these 8 points of thought reform. These 8 things that if you do these things, you can radically change how people think and how they act and how they feel about things. And one of those 8 points is called loaded language. You load the language. You set up a language so that it means something a bit different than how other people understand the language. You come up with specialized meanings for words or phrases. But not only that, but you actually use language as a tool of control. And one of the ways that this is done is through what's called a thought-stopping cliche, or a thought-terminating cliche. It's a phrase, a word or a phrase or a label that we will assign something so that we don't have to think about it anymore.
A conspiracy theorist.
Well, conspiracy theorists do it all the time.
Right?
All the time, right?
Sure.
We all use this mental mechanism of categorization in order to understand the world better and not have to think all the time. I mean, that makes sense. Your brain is already running, 30% of the energy in your body is being utilized by this thing.
Right.
All the time, just to keep your body going and regulate your body and do your thinking for you. That's its function, right? And it's predicting and it's thinking and calculating and all of that. A lot of energy is used doing that. So as much as can be conserved as possible, it makes sense that we would want to think and act that way. Cult leaders take advantage of this.
Yeah.
And the way they do it is they feed you mantras or phrases so that when you say them, you don't have to think anymore. For example, I am a Scientology critic. I have made many, many, many videos breaking down why Scientology is bad for you. In order to nullify all of that work, you could go and debate me point by point, piece by piece, take every single claim I make and go, well, that's not true because blah, 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 blah. You could do that. Scientology won't do that, and they never will. Right. But you could. You'd lose anyway because I am speaking the truth, but that's beside the point. You could also nullify everything I am saying by sticking a label on me. And the label that Scientology uses, the loaded language that they've invented out of nowhere, right, is suppressive person. I am a suppressive person according to Scientology. And by making that label and defining it as an antisocial personality whose sole intention is to harm everybody around them, make them less able to survive in their life, and thereby control and cow them and make them into ineffective people. That's what a suppressive person is, according to Scientology. So they slap that label on me, and every single Scientologist immediately can ignore everything I have to say. He's just a suppressive person. That is the thought-stopping cliche. He's just a suppressive person. That's an example of loading the language, of taking language and making it into a tool where you control how people think. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I see it.
Yeah.
I mean, you see
that
it.
Works?
Yeah, it's rampant through our society.
Oh, yeah.
And the way in which we're divided amongst races and genders. And like,
that's right.
Once you begin seeing it, you just have to put your head in your hands on your knees for a minute and take a breath and be like, these motherfuckers.
Yeah.
These motherfuckers, man. Yeah. They do not want us working together at any means. It's the white guy's fault. It's the black guy's fault. The women's fault. It's the men's. It's the gay people's fault. It's like it's always somebody else's fault, and there's always a reason to hate your neighbor. Always. Exactly. And they're the problem. You know why you can't get it? It's not the guy up top. It's not the people controlling the money. It's not the government. It's not the coercive power up top. It's the guy next to you. That fucking son of a bitch, man. You know what he's doing? He's got a blue car, man. Yeah, we know about blue cars, right? Yeah, you know what I'm talking about.
Right. That's right. No, and that's exactly right. We take the natural function of categorization that our brains do, and we vilify it, right? We turn it on its ear, and we all do it again. Like, this is normal behavior,
right?
It's totally fine, totally organic, totally makes sense,
right?
But when a predatory personality constructs these on purpose and instills them in his followers or the people who are willing to listen to the guy and convinces them of the truth of it, now you have culty activity, right? Because it's not just organic or temporary or
Mhm.
a cultural fad or something like that. This is a dedicated activity. Those
Yeah.
suppressive people are out there, right? This is a label Hubbard came up with in the 60s. And once he came up with it, there was this entire system that went into place to label somebody, declare them in writing, right? With a yellow piece of paper, Chris Shelton, suppressive person. And they list all the person's crimes according to Scientology, right? He did this and he did that and he did this other thing and he's not welcome in our group anymore. And should he ever come to his senses, then he can come crawling back to us and go through the whole appeasement and rehabilitation process, which we will so, what's the word?
Magnanimously allow.
Magnanimous. There it is. That's the word, right? Which we will so magnanimously give to him in our gracious,
Yeah.
wonderfulness, right?
Yeah.
So it takes this normal, natural thing that we do where we can kind of act a little viciously toward each other, and it just dials it up to 20, right? And
Yeah.
that's kind of what I'm talking about in terms of making these things formal structures of control. It's a dedicated, premeditated effort. It's not an accident. None of this stuff that goes on with coercive control situations or cult situations is an accident. There is opportunism, and there is cult leaders will take advantage of situations organically, but it's always a premeditated, dedicated effort on their part. They didn't just luck into it, and that's important to
Right.
understand about this.
That brings up an interesting point that I don't know a whole lot about, but it seems to me that when the charismatic leader of an organization is on its way out, like is that why Marshall and
Jim Jones.
Jim Jones is like, do they see the end near? It's like, okay, I got to kill everybody. Or, hey, is that like the final? Do you think that the end being near for them, as them losing control, that's what I mean by the end, is that what facilitates a drastic action on the end, on the other side?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Wow.
It is.
Wow.
Now, oh yeah. No question about it. I mean, this is a psychotic personality, and psychosis is a thing, and psychopathy and evil exists. It's a real thing. And when in the mind of a deranged individual who is losing all of his influence and power that is accumulated over years, decades of time, they implode. And when they implode, they take as many people with them as they can.
Yeah.
Now, Applewhite's situation was a premeditated, knowing goal. I mean, they'd been working for it for years. They said exactly what they were going to do. And everybody who really came into that group and dedicated themselves to it knew where it was going, which was a little bit of a different thing. In fact, a wildly different thing from a David Koresh or a Jim Jones implosion, where external forces are coming and operating on the group, and they know they're about to lose all of their power. This happened with Koresh. This happened with Jim Jones. And so their response to that is to throw a psychotic fit and take as many people with them as they can.
When we look at bigger groups, especially religious groups, there seems to be, it seems to me that there is an opportunity for reformation sometimes. If we look at like Martin Luther and he staples his paper to the door, like, this is what we're going to do now. Or if you go way back to like the Sunni Shia split and you're like, okay, are we going with Muhammad's family or are we going with this number 2 guy?
Right.
You know what I mean? Like we see these splits happening. And in a slightly humorous but interesting way, might it be possible for a new wing of Scientology to take over, or like someone to wrestle control and take it in a different way? Well,
as a matter of fact, that's already happened. What we call that is independent Scientology.
Okay.
And it's Scientology's methods and practices outside of the formal umbrella of the Church of Scientology as an organization. You're talking about schisms, right? You're
Okay.
talking about denominations and how they
Yes.
form.
Oh, yes.
This is again classic human behavior. Is a group forms, and then somebody has a real problem with what the leader is doing or
Yeah. Yeah.
saying, or and it becomes enough of a moral problem to them, because I mentioned earlier moral outrages,
Yeah.
right? There is nothing more powerful, I believe, personally, is my opinion. I believe that there is no other thinking that is more powerful to influence our behavior than moral thinking, right? What's
Mm.
right and wrong, good and bad, what we think of as acceptable as unacceptable. And when a group schisms, it's usually on that kind of basis of like, no, this isn't the right path. We got to go down this other path. And
Right.
and the person saying that will try to accumulate, we'll try to gain social
Yeah.
proof. We'll try to get social acceptance of this. And if half the group or a quarter of the group or some of the group goes, yeah, you're right. Ha. Okay, good.
Yep.
Now I can go be my own leader, and we
Yeah.
can go do this own thing. And they split off. And this is the evolution of religion on this planet from day one. Has been a pattern of this over and over again throughout every culture that human beings have ever created. There's not been one that has been immune to this divisive phenomena. It's how people it's how ideas evolve over time.
It's like beehives, when it gets too big, they swarm and they go and they create a new hive somewhere,
That's
exactly
right.
the same, only different,
That's right.
What do
Yeah.
you think
Yeah,
about?
it's fascinating stuff.
Yeah, and on some ways, I'm so thankful to have, like, I was a UPS driver for like 26 years, and in some
Oh,
weird
wow.
way, like, yeah, like I couldn't do it anymore. And I feel like I broke the behavioral conditioning of a corporate livelihood. And it's not the same as a cult, but in some ways, like I felt as if like the company that I worked for betrayed me and everybody working there by putting on these incredibly unrealistic work standards and driving everybody into the ground. And they gave you an
Yeah.
employee number instead of a person, and you had to do all these
Yeah.
humiliating things. And it just became too much for me.
Yep.
And I got to a point where I'm like, I'm not going to do it anymore. And okay, so what should I do? Well, I should, you know what? Maybe the leadership doesn't thoroughly understand they're doing these things. And the best thing to do is to point out the flaws in it. And so you start doing that. And you get to a certain point where you get to a district manager or a cardinal or however you want to draw the parallel. And you realize, son of a bitch, this is not a bug, it's a feature.
Yeah.
And now you're like, okay, what are you going to do? Are you going to find ways to make yourself be okay with it? You're going to continue to lie to yourself? Or is the lie so big that you create a catalyst in yourself to change? And in doing so, hopefully spread some breadcrumbs for those that have doubt to follow you out.
Yep.
And I think that's what I see in like people like yourself that have found the courage or dug down deep enough in them to make a change, not only in what they believe, but fundamentally change who they are. Like, I think it's so powerful to do what you're doing, man. Thanks for that.
Oh, well, thank you very much for that. And I understand what you're talking about, because the way I put it is, how I understand it is you're hitting the reset button on your life.
Yeah.
And when I did that at 42 years old, that was a big risk. That was a jump off a cliff. It was like, I don't know where this is going to go, but something has to change.
Yep.
And not everybody's up to that. And it's not a value judgment on them. It's just a fact. It's just a fact. Otherwise, we would have a very different world if everybody was willing to just, cut and run when things got difficult or disagreeable to them.
Right.
Then groups would not have the cohesion that they have. And the methods of control that cults use are the same methods of control everybody else uses. Again, it's just a matter of degree, right?
Yeah.
And the other thing that we can differentiate, because, people have said over the years to me things like, well, the military is a cult, or, well, my company is a cult, or the government is a cult, or all religion is a cult. And it's like, no, guys, there's nuance here. There's nuance, and it has to be understood. One of the things that cults that you're dealing with a destructive cult, as we call them, is what do they do when you try to leave? You know, your company didn't stalk and harass you and follow you
No.
home and go through your garbage and start trashing you on public social media after you left. They went, okay, you quit, bye.
Yep.
And they went and hired another driver, right? They didn't
Yep.
care. That's corporate culture. It's an uncaring culture.
Right.
It's got its goals, and its goals have to do with making profit for its shareholders, and that's the goal. And humanity and human rights for its employees is a secondary goal. It's not the primary goal of any corporation anywhere, you know, and we all kind of live in this society where we know that's true, and then we kind of pretend it's not, but it kind of is.
Yeah.
You know, cults are different. Cults are lying to you from day one. A corporation isn't. They'll tell you straight up, these are the rules. You're going to follow them. And if you don't, you're not going to have a job here anymore. And that's how it's going to work. But if you do follow the rules and you're willing to do this, we'll pay you this, we'll give you X benefits, and we will assure that you can continue to have an existence in this world because we're giving you money. That's the agreement. There, it's totally upfront, or most of it is very upfront. And if you look, you can see it's all there. It's called informed consent.
Yeah.
A cult does not give you informed consent, not once. You come in and you think you're going down road A, and you're actually being put very firmly on road B. And you're told and sold on road A. You're told you're gonna have this happen to you, and this is going to happen, and you're going to invest a little bit of money, and you're going to have the most amazing returns, and you're going to have spiritual powers and abilities, or you're going to have riches beyond, you know, the dreams of avarice. You know, because multi-level marketing does the same crap, right? It's the same culty kind of paradigm.
Right.
You get all these promises and all this wonderful talk and all these wonderful words are thrown at you, and you're just, and it's usually accompanied by an emotional experience, which is quite heady, right? You're like, you get to this euphoric, you know, oh my God, Scientology is the be all end all of existence. You know, I couldn't believe how great I felt when I signed up because it was so wonderful, right? That's induced in you. They want you feeling that way because you're not thinking so well when you're in that state. And they're not telling you on day one in Scientology that in order to get to the top level of Scientology, it's going to cost you $1 million.
Wow.
And you're not getting there until you give us $1 million. And you go, if they told you that on day one, you'd probably be like, that's way too much money for this. What are you talking about, right? So they don't tell you that. And in fact, they absolutely tell you the exact opposite. Oh, no, you can do Scientology for very little money. It's not going to cost you much of anything at all. You can team up with somebody else and you can work with them, and it's really cheap, and you can go all the way up this bridge to total freedom, and it's going to be wonderful, and you're only going to pay a few $100 and no big deal, right? That's not informed consent. That's fraud. That's a lie. That's what they always do. When that's part of the anatomy of the group, when that's part of the recruitment process of the group, you know you're dealing with a dishonest group. And that's one of the things that is a big difference between a group like Scientology and a group like IBM. You know? Or even the military. You know, it's not like the military isn't straight up with you about what's about to happen when you go into boot camp. There's movies about it. There's books about it. You can go watch TV. You can read articles about it. Yeah. You know, minute by minute, day by day, exactly what's going to happen to you. And it's not going to be fun. And it's going to be a little traumatizing. And it's going to be really damn difficult. But you know that on day one. And that matters when it comes to how you sign up for things. You should know before you go. You know?
Yeah.
So that's kind of an important point. It's what happens at the beginning and what happens at the end can tell you an awful lot about the nature of a group.
On some level, though, like if you look at the military propaganda, like, and you look at movies like Top Gun, you know, or like you look at movies like some of the ways in which they use the advertising machine in order to get you to sign up for something. And they use things like, hey man, we're going to spread some democracy. and we're gonna get some oil too. I mean, but mostly
Well,
democracy. You
yeah,
know, and these people aren't freedom fighters. These are terrorists. You
correct.
understand that? There's a
That's right.
difference there.
That's right.
So like on
That's
some
right.
level, they're using those same techniques. And I it's interesting I bring up advertising because I've read certain accounts of certain advertising firms studying the words of Charles Manson. Like
Oh yeah.
they harness these I guess you could call them technologies or cadences or provocative behaviors in order to hook people's attention and stuff like that. But you know what, before I jump too far, were there people coming and looking through your trash and threatening you? Like maybe you could talk a little bit about what it was like to escape this, man. It sounds pretty.
Oh, sure. Yeah. No, of course.
Crazy.
Yeah, no, Scientology is pretty nuts in that
Right.
regards. I've
Yeah.
managed personally to kind of fly kind of under the radar in a many ways compared to a Leah Remini or a Mike Rinder, right, or a Tony Ortega, people who have really gotten some shellacking.
Yeah.
And that's okay with me. I'm not in this to get, in Scientology they call it fair gaming. You're fair gamed, right? They're coming after you. They don't go after everybody. Right. I mean, people have gotten really paranoid about this. They think, oh, I don't even want to leave a comment on one of your videos because Scientology is going to come after me. It's like, calm down. It's not, they're not that big and they're not that powerful. Right. They're not going to do that. But they do it. They do go after high profile people and they do go through their trash and they do follow them around and they do harass them and they call their family and friends and harass them too. And it's a very vicious, ugly thing that they get up to. These are dedicated efforts to intimidate, bully, and harass until the critic shuts up. The entire point is get them to shut up because they don't want their crimes exposed. That's the bottom line, right? Scientology is a fraudulent activity which rips people off to the tune of millions and millions of dollars. And they like that money and they want it to keep coming in. And if we're exposing all their abuses, they don't like that. And they can't argue with the truth because that is the truth.
Yeah.
So they can only reframe it so many different ways. Charles Manson's group was no different, right? Jim Jones's was no different too. They had PRs and PR lines. And a lot of people forget that Jim Jones was a very well accepted person in the California and even federal governments. Like he had ties with all kinds of people. Sun Myung Moon of the Moonies, the Unification Church. That guy had his picture taken with 5 or 6 different presidents of the United States. Powerful people.
Yeah.
So these guys are all about harnessing and controlling that power. And when they are threatened, they use that power very liberally to try to destroy their enemies. Hubbard literally wrote, "Ruin them utterly." That's what you do with critics. So I've gotten off pretty light comparatively. I have a hate website that is still up. You look me up on the internet, you'll find it, right? Claims I'm a horrible, awful person and I cheated and I did this and I did that. And it's so third grader in its attitude. It's such a bullying sort of, lame attempt that that's really not harmed me in any real specific way. But it's but again, Leah Remini, on the other hand, has had her life significantly messed with.
Yeah.
And that's no joke, right? And so I'm happy that I can kind of just slough it off, whereas somebody like her really has to deal with the daily problems of it. And she's bringing a whole lawsuit against Scientology right now to get them to stop doing that. It's that bad, gotten that bad for her.
As someone who consults with former cult members, what patterns or tactics do you often observe in these coercively controlling environments? And how do you guide individuals in breaking free from such an influence?
Cool. So the Lifton's 8 points are a great guide to figuring out how control is exerted in the first place, right? Through milieu control and through loaded language and enforced confessions and, sacred science and all these various things. So what you do with people when they come out is you educate them first on these structures, on these principles. How is it that control happens in the first place? And by control, I mean undue influence. I mean, people being told what to do or being made to feel certain ways to limit their choices,
Mm-hmm.
to sort of bind their ability to exert their free will so that it follows only the path that the cult wants and they don't stray from that path. That's what I mean by control. So, for example, not going to the police to report a crime. Don't get to do that when you're in Scientology. You got to go to Scientology's internal justice system to report crimes. And I'm talking about crimes like sexual assault, like crimes.
Whoa.
Right? You don't get to do that. It's literally written into Scientology's justice codes that you do not publicly disavow Scientology or Scientologists, and you don't report them to the media, and you don't report them to authorities. You report them to Scientology, and we'll take care of it. That kind of thing, right? So you start showing people or breaking these down for people as to how this is a controlling apparatus, and that it's built on purpose that way. Yeah. And once they start seeing that, they go, oh, right. So this and this and this. And you go, yeah, exactly. Right. All these little things that didn't look like a big deal at the time, right, but you start reframing it and seeing how it has been limiting your choices. And that limited choice kind of thing is sort of like, well, you still have choices. So you still experience this idea that you're controlling your fate or your destiny somehow, but the choices are so limited that you really don't have any choices. It just looks like that. Yeah. And that's what you teach people, right? That kind of thing. I usually start with that sort of thing. I also often get into attachment theory and the fact that the psychological, the way we form attachments or relationships with other people, how we attach to them, how the relationships work is often crucial to understanding the cult relationship, because it's often a codependent relationship. And codependency is not a good thing.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because what happens is you start defining your own happiness or your own success based on what other people think or say, like the cult leader.
Yeah.
And if he doesn't approve or she doesn't approve or she has something to say about it, oh, I guess I didn't deserve that. Yeah. I guess I wasn't, I shouldn't be happy, right? That kind of thing. It's complicated. It's hard to break it down into simple examples, but it's that codependency is the same kind of codependency you see in domestic abuse situations. Why can't you just leave? Why didn't you just walk out? Right? It's the stupidest question in the world when you really understand how this stuff works, that you can't just walk out. Right. Your entire life is structured around this person or this group. So destructuring that, deconstructing that is the process that we call recovery. And learning how it works, talking it through, journaling, watching shows, anything that kind of produces some catharsis is valid. And all of these things provide that, right? As well as, of course, getting some actual therapy if there is trauma or, other issues that need to be dealt with along the way. Because sometimes cults will induce dissociative states.
Yep.
Right? These out-of-body experiences, for example, or, these sort of ethereal, sort of awe-induced sort of, you chant or you meditate for 10 hours straight and you're in this very altered state of thinking. That's all by design. That's on purpose. And they're taking you places that are pretty psychologically unhealthy. So, undoing that kind of stuff can involve therapy. But I think education is really where it's at.
Do you think that like David and Tom sit down and they speak about like, this is just total speculation, but
sure.
Like on some level, I try to imagine like what it would be like to have that kind of power and to start thinking about those kind of power dynamics and like, listen, we need to continue to get people to think this way, Or are they totally consumed with like, yes, L. Ron Hubbard was a god, and we have that same thing in us? Do they believe what they're telling people, or are they aware? Which world are they living in? Are they a manifestation of God, or are they a sort of huckster that is like drunk on power?
It's interesting because it tends to be a little bit of both.
I could see that.
Yeah, it tends to be again, spectrum-based thinking, right? It's not a black and white binary.
Right.
L. Ron Hubbard was the same, right? And it can be very different for each person. Marshall Applewhite, 100% committed. Right. Obviously, a true believer.
Committed. Like I was committed.
He went all the way.
I shouldn't laugh.
He went all the way.
I apologize for laughing, but that's true. Commitment.
That's right. He was. He was. Now, does that mean anything he had to say was true? No. Right? So it doesn't, it's a separate thing from the truth of a thing as to how committed somebody is to it. Now, that being said, it's a source of much speculation in the ex-Scientology world, just how committed David Miscavige is to Scientology.
Did he go all the way?
Versus how much does he know it's a con?
Yeah.
And the same applied to L. Ron Hubbard in many ways. There are very interesting personal writings that L. Ron Hubbard wrote pre-Scientology, which indicated that he had deep and real occult magic beliefs.
Right.
And that he wanted as a life goal to exert his will and dominate the will of others. That was in his own private writings. So you can't ignore that. You go, wow, this guy was a real megalomaniac. This guy was on a real power trip.
Yeah.
But at the same time, in those same writings, he's acknowledging his disabilities and his dysfunctions and his problems and issues that he was clearly struggling with, and his self-loathing and his fits of depression and anxiety and drinking and drugs that he was using to try to deal with that.
Mm-hmm.
And you look at a man who is a very broken, unstable, self-hating individual. And you go, wow, but this exists in the same guy. This is a complicated individual, as are we all, right? Once you really get into the psychology of it, you start realizing, damn, we got a lot of layers to us. On Tuesday, we're the megalomaniac, and on Wednesday, we're, the alcoholic fit of depression.
Yep.
Same body, same mind, radically different places. And L. Ron Hubbard also, for example, might have actually had a physical problem with his brain, which we call temporal lobe epilepsy. This is a pretty well-studied thing now, but when L. Ron Hubbard was around, it was not. And that can cause lesions in the brain, can actually cause epileptic seizures, which cause and induce religious mania and fervent religious belief, to the point that a person who suffers from TLE could believe that they are God and literally have a conversation with you as though they are, fully believing they are, during the time of their seizure. So could that be an explanation for some of L. Ron Hubbard's behavior? It absolutely could be. So I bring up L. Ron Hubbard because, we've kind of dived into him a lot, and he is the source of Scientology. Miscavige is an offshoot of that. He was a young man who grew up in Scientology. He's second generation, just like I was. And he bought into it fully and completely. He felt it cured his asthma when he was a teenager. It did. He still has asthma, but it did so much for it that he thought it cured it, and he fully hooked on. And in a couple of years, he was right under the old man working for Hubbard. I mean, he was that dedicated and that intent on doing Scientology. And within a few years after that, Hubbard died and Miscavige was in the power position, and he took over. And it seems pretty clear that he was a true believer the entire time, meaning he was all in. He absolutely believed in L. Ron Hubbard and the workability of L. Ron Hubbard's methods. So does he still, after all these years and all these failures and all these problems, does he still a true believer? We actually don't know. Maybe yes, maybe no. There's indications on both sides. It's a little hard to tell, right? Mind reading is difficult. So,
Yeah.
right. So it gets interesting. What I can say for sure, based on all the knowledge that I do have and people that I've spoken with who were in the inner circle, it seems very, very clear that Tom Cruise is an absolute dedicated religious fanatic. He's all in on Scientology. He absolutely believes it's all true. He is at the highest levels of Scientology. He's gone all the way to the top. And from his point of view, it's not exactly that hard to understand. He's only the single most successful actor who ever lived.
Yeah.
He's only
Yeah.
one of the most admired people on this entire planet. I mean, he's kind of accomplished all his goals and he keeps accomplishing more.
Yeah.
And he personally credits Scientology for that. Now, I wouldn't credit Scientology for that.
Right.
He
Right.
does. So he's as true a believer as you're ever going to get. That also means there's another side to Tom Cruise, which we probably don't have time to get into today, which is a very dark side. Because Scientology imbues in people not only a successful, go-get-'em, hyper-focused attitude, it also imbues an awful lot of awful in people. Cruise has abused his family. He has taken advantage of people in very, very gross and disgusting ways in terms of practically, slave labor for him. I mean, his whole life has been sort of, what's the word? Infiltrated by Scientology.
Mm-hmm.
His personal staff are Scientologists, that kind of thing, right? He doesn't see
Yeah.
his own daughter because of Scientology. That's why he won't see Suri. Right. And she's almost an adult now. He just eschews that entire thing because of Scientology. He could have been a wonderful father to his daughter. I'm sure he's got a lot of good traits.
Yeah.
But the Scientology makes him crazy. And I mean crazy, like full blown. He believes crazy things and he believes that they're absolutely true. So that's Tom Cruise, right? So it's a mixed bag. It's like there's all this good, there's all this charity work, there's all this incredible entertainment that he provides people, but then there's this dark side. And people don't want to see or acknowledge that dark side exists. Right. They just don't want to. They're too entertained by him. And he's got that winning smile, And that's human beings. And that's taken me a lot of years to come to a place where I'm okay with that. Because I used to grit my teeth and just be so upset with people that they couldn't see what I could see. But how could they? They don't know all the things I know, right? So it's a difficult proposition, But in terms of intent, at the end of the day, whether the cult leader really believes in their mantras and their belief system or not is of secondary importance to me to the abuses that they engage in, regardless of whether they believe it or not.
That's well said.
Yeah. So
it's so like, I think we lack the language to fully communicate meaning and feelings to one another.
Sure.
And in that, like, you could, tons of people do, and you could easily make the argument that L. Ron Hubbard has the divine spark. You know what I mean? Like, I don't mean that like in a good, positive way of like divinity. And who am I to interpret divinity? But I mean, by saying that, like, if you look at what his writings have left behind, you on one level, you can see this trailer park of despair, or you can see this incredible pathway to achieving wealth and riches beyond your means, just depending on which lens you do. And like, maybe that's a sign that spark is in all of us. And, which one do you want to nurture, and how easy a good idea can go bad. And
that's right.
It's so amazing to me, man.
No, I agree. I agree completely. It is amazing. And I have sat and stood in wonder at some of this, because it is quite amazing.
It is.
It can be amazingly good or amazingly bad, depending on the context again, right? Of course. See, Cruise and Scientologists who are successful are that way because they emulate L. Ron Hubbard's personality in that They are willing to step on anybody to
Mm.
accomplish their goals. They're willing to destroy anybody who gets in their path as long as they get what they want. So from their point of view, they are highly successful. I mean, this even goes back to Nietzsche, right? I mean, master
Right.
philosophy, master
The
morality,
Ubermensch.
right, versus the slave morality, right?
Right.
And Scientology and L. Ron Hubbard very much considers himself master philosophy, right? The Uberman. That is what it's all about. And when you're in that framing of the world, the only thing that really matters to you is what matters to you.
Yeah.
No one else matters. And then there's those of us who kind of have a more communal approach to the world, right? We kind of want everybody to get along, and we'd rather have a level playing field where everybody can kind of interact with one another and have an equal chance and opportunity and that kind of thing. That's what we would really like to see. That's not what those guys want. And they develop this morality built around that, and they act accordingly. And it is capable, that morality is capable of taking an individual CEO level, movie star level, grand leader level, right? President of the United States level. It doesn't necessarily take you to a place where you actually help a lot of people or where you're really doing a lot of good for anybody but you, And that can be rough because people want that level of success and that degree of wealth or opportunity or influence or power. But the road to that is often paved, on the dead bodies of those you have to destroy to get there. And that's what Scientology teaches you, is how to do that. If you take all the teachings and you apply it in that way, you can be a Tom Cruise. But you're going to leave behind you a lot of broken people. And if that's okay with you, then you and I have a problem, right? Because that's not what I think is moral behavior. And that's why I do what I do, is because it's not just about success or wealth or influence or power. There's more to this world and life than that, And
yeah, I do.
And that's my moral preaching on the matter, but that's where I come from in this.
It reminds me of when you talk about Tom or David or pick your maniacal leader.
Yeah.
I think John Ronson wrote a book called The Psychopath Test.
Mm-hmm.
And you can read that book, and in the back of that book, there's a quiz that you can take. And if I think he makes the point in that book too that in the Western world, it seems that we are beginning to self-select leadership based on attributes in that psychopath test. And if you start rising up the ladder of power, more and more people have those attributes. And look where we are today. It kind of manifests itself like, oh, these are the attributes of someone who's a psychopath, who doesn't really care too much about the well-being of others as long as they accomplish their goals. Look at where that's gotten us, right?
That's right. No, that's exactly right. And that's the flaw inherent in the system that ultimately causes or brings about revolutions in the system, which is the self-correcting mechanism for when psychopaths get too much power. Is we have a revolution, right?
Yeah.
And often it's violent, which is very unfortunate, because there's usually this phase where some other psychopath, rises to the occasion to do the revolt. And then we have to get rid of them too. Right?
Yeah.
One of the grand, amazing things about the American experiment, of U.S. democracy or U.S. government is that we had a violent revolution, but it wasn't a bunch of psychopaths leading it. Yeah. And we didn't have the Maoist, let's line up all the intellectuals and let's line up all the academics and let's line up all the troublemakers and let's kill all of them as the first step in our glorious, new world. Right. That we didn't do that in the United States. And that I believe was an exception to the rule of how revolution usually goes. And then we built a system based on the idea that people have rights and that those rights matter. And while it wasn't everybody universally at the beginning, it more and more and more is, because we have a system that was built to self-correct itself, which is, again, a rarity in our world. So this is why I look at our system here in the US right now, for example, and I'm kind of biased toward it. Of course, I've grown up in it too, but I have good reasons to support it. Authoritarian systems of control always emerge when people at the lowest levels are stressing out and freaking out and losing their damn minds because they feel, and often rightfully so, that their lives are not what they could be or should be. And they want more, or they want, a better quality of life, or at least a living wage, right? Like in the United States right now. And we're kind of ruining this experiment through the rise of the psychopathy and and as they wrote all the way back at the beginning, if you're a student of history, with the Federalist Papers, you have factions, right? Which they warned us about. Right. And yet here we are with political parties, and we've only got 2 of them. I mean, I could go on all day about the inequities of our current system and the sort of destruction that's built into it. But eventually this stuff all works out, one way or another. And when you keep moving on, So I'm more of an optimist than a pessimist, to be honest. I can rail about these inequities and stuff, but I feel our system is capable of change, and I'd like to see more of that in our world, rather than just let's get each other's, let's pitchfork each other in the throats. I think that's a ridiculous way to conduct ourselves these days, and I think social media is partly to blame for that. And I think our media has a lot to answer for in terms of its clickbait advertising based model. I think that was an incredibly horrible decision, early on in our news media thing and all of that. So there's a lot of irons in the fire as to why things are the way they are. But I wish it were simpler.
Yeah.
And I wish I could talk about it in more simple ways, but I'm just too much of a nuanced guy,
Well, I think it comes from lived experience and knowing that there is no simple answer.
That's right.
There's a true power in having the empathy and the patience to try and listen to the other side and put yourself in that spot. Like, that's how problems get solved. Like, look, I get it. Okay, tell me what it is. Oh shit, I never thought about it from that angle. Okay. And then that's how we move this thing forward. And like, that's kind of what gives me hope right now, is that even though there seems to be 2 sides at end, like they're coming to loggerheads, like that's when it gets so bad you have to solve something. And a lot history shows that sometimes it turns into Israel and Palestine, or sometimes it turns into right or left or 2 political parties. But I think that enough people, and just look at the symptom of this. Like, here you are leaving this institution. You had the courage to leave a family, a community, a foundational structure with which you were brought up, and a set of beliefs that you believed your whole life. Like, that is progress. You know what? Not anymore. I think something's wrong. I'm going to change. And it's those small changes we do as individuals. It's the individual becoming a thorough, authentic version of themselves, the best version of themselves, that changes society. And when we all do that, the change happens around us, I think, on some level. But I got to tell you, Chris, this is fascinating, man. And you have to come back, because I got through 2 questions, and I have 12. So,
well, I wish I could say that was not a common thing, but it happens all the time. I am more than happy to talk more about all this stuff.
Yeah.
We've gotten into some really interesting fundamental stuff here, and I really thank you for providing I didn't quite expect this. This was really quite good. And what you had to say in your emails was true. You really are open to lots and lots of ideas about things, and that's great. Because that's how we actually have real conversations, and not just political, ideological diatribes,
Yeah.
I think we need a lot more of that.
Me too. I think people are like, I like to think that most people, I want to hear your opinion, and maybe it's right, maybe it's wrong, maybe it's misguided. I know for me, like, maybe this is not the best way to do it, but I think most people are like me, and are like, I say things all the time that are wrong, but I'm happy to be corrected. I'm happy to be like, oh, I never thought about it from that angle. You're right. You know what? I'm sorry for that. Or I didn't know. I was naive. I didn't know, man.
Sure.
So, and people are misguided. They want to know, and they give the illusion of knowing. Like, I know this. You know how I know? Because I live my life like this. Well, maybe you shouldn't. Why not?
Right.
You know?
Right. Right.
So
no, you're absolutely right. And the word that we've forgotten, the word that seems to be disappearing from public discourse these days is compromise.
I love it.
And it's what it's the one concept that our entire government is based on. Our entire social structure in the United States is based on, because we're the melting pot, right? We're the place where all the different cultures come together. And to think that you're going to set up something like that and there isn't going to be conflict, of course there's going to be. On a routine basis, there's going to be. Conflict is not the bug. It is a feature of our society that there is conflict. It's the ability to compromise with that conflict that we've lost sight of. And that's the extremism of the both ends of any spectrum. Is it's our way or the highway. There is no compromise possible. And that's where that's the way that our society is becoming more culty.
Yeah.
And that's what we need to get the brakes applied to. We need to slow that down, and we need to get more towards the middle again, where we can recognize nuance and differences, shades of gray.
Yeah.
And we can recognize that just because we think a thing doesn't necessarily mean it's true. And be willing to be open to other ideas. It's taken me a long time to be able to say that across the entire spectrum of my life. But at this point, the only real cure for cultism is to not commit 100% to anything, because you're never going to know before you go into something the full experience of it.
Yeah.
You can't. You have to experience it.
Yeah.
So never let yourself go 100%. I really don't care about what it is, what culture war value, morality issue, religious issue, political issue. It doesn't matter. Don't go 100%, because when you do, you're doing yourself the disservice of not being able to think anymore about that topic, because it's just this. You lose your critical thinking, and you become so emotionally invested that it becomes part of your identity. And once it's part of your identity, it's too late. You've committed. You've overcommitted to it. And that's that. If there was one thing, if it was one thing I could get across to people, it would be that.
It's well said.
Thank you.
Thank you. This is fun, man. I really enjoyed it. But before I let you go, like, where can people find you? What do you have coming up? Where's the book for sale? Is this a part 2? Is there another part? Like, where can people get it? Can you get signed copies, or what's going on?
No, good. All good questions. Okay, so this is my book. I will be writing more, but this one is it right now. If you want to know about Scientology, this is the book. Okay. There's actually 2 books to read. This is one of them. It's called Scientology A to Xenu. And this is not my memoir. This is a breakdown of Scientology. Like, if you want to know all about it, it's in here. The other book to read, by the way, is John Atack's A Piece of Blue Sky. That's also another good one. You can find me on YouTube under my name, Chris Shelton, Chris Shelton MSC. I am really not trying to be egotistical, by the way, by putting letters after my name. It was just too damn hard to get that degree. So I put it there, right?
Yeah.
It was just, it was a major accomplishment in my life. So I'm proud of it. But I've got a channel. I've got a YouTube channel. I have a podcast that I will be, it's coming out in the new year. It's going to be called Speaking of Cults. Up till now, it's been called the Sensibly Speaking Podcast. But it's all on my YouTube channel, and it's all on my website, mncriticalthinking.com. So,
yeah, everybody. I thought, what about Dianetics? Is that when I was growing up, there was Dianetics everywhere, and like that was sort of my first look into this thing. And I never read it, but it seemed like it was really blown up. Is that affiliated with Scientology?
That's how it all started. L. Ron Hubbard wrote Dianetics in 1950. It was released in May 1950 as the Modern Science of Mental Health, quote unquote.
Wow.
And within a year and a half, it was bankrupted. I mean, it was a legit bestseller. It was it went viral.
Yeah, it did.
Yeah, it went totally viral in 1950. And then it went bankrupt. And out of the ashes of that, L. Ron Hubbard formed a religion called Scientology.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
So fascinating.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, go check out Chris Shelton's YouTube channel. Check out his book. If you know somebody that may have found themselves in a situation where they're being coercively controlled, this is the guy to talk to. This is someone who has fundamentally changed the way he sees the world. But beyond all that, he has lived experience of the techniques that were perpetrated against him and that he used in some ways. Like, this is a guy that knows. So go and reach out to him. If you find yourself in Hawaii, we have a cult on Molokai. Like, if you're in Hawaii and you've been part of that cult, or if you find yourself anywhere in the world, or I think that your work leverages over into the world of well-being and mental illness and abusive relationships. So anybody that's curious about coercive behavior, this is the guy to talk to. Go down to the show notes, check him out, reach out to him. He's a really fun and interesting and intelligent person to talk to. So please go check him out. Listen to his YouTube channel, get the book. And that's all we got for today. Chris, hang on briefly afterwards. I'll speak with you, but I just want to say to everyone out there listening, thank you so much for being here. I hope you have a wonderful weekend. Aloha.
Bye-bye.